Hello, and welcome to the Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinx. My name is Chris, and with me as always, fresh from his weekend, is Mike. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I've just been editing our episode on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood recently. I just actually stopped doing that to record this. And then when I'm done, I'll be going back to that.
And Justin, if you were to pick a day of the weekend, which one would you be?
Oh, I'm a big Saturday.
A big Saturday?
Just fully.
Wait, did I just completely ignore that question? Did you ask me that too?
No, I just said you were fresh from the weekend.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought. I was about to say. Why does he get a special question?
Because I just thought of it.
Oh, okay. Well, I wish you were a few seconds earlier.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm a Saturday, but I know I'm not a Sunday. You know what I mean? It's like I can look at Sunday and be like, that's not me.
Sunday's the day where you're going to have to go back to work. So it's kind of like the preparation day for going back to work. Saturday is just a free-for-all.
Totally.
And Mike, what day of the weekend are you?
Who cares, man? You didn't even ask me earlier when it was time.
I was so bummed out. I'm so sorry, Mike. I hope one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me.
Maybe. Guys, if this is your first time listening to the show, this is a Casually Criterion episode, which is a Criterion Collection focused episode we do usually once a month. We've been kind of lacking on that lately.
Mostly my fault, sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, that's where we review a film from, you guessed it, the Criterion Collection. The thing is, it's picked by you, the listeners, usually in a social media poll, which we'll be talking about later on in the show. Before we get into our Casually Criterion review, we'll be talking about the upcoming Criterion announcements for September and October of 2019, which will include spine number 1000. Then we will be doing the Casually Criterion review for Weekend by Jean-Luc Godard, spine number 635.
Yeah, and if you want to vote in the polls to pick our next Criterion film, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. You can also send your questions and thoughts on the films they're going to be reviewing to those accounts, and then you can also email them to casualcinemedia@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so yet and you like the show, you're a fan of it, you want to help other people find the show and become fans of it, leave us an iTunes review, a 5-star one preferably.
Mm-hmm.
It helps people find the show. Also subscribe if you haven't.
Yeah, thank you in advance. Also, by the way, for the social media polls to vote on the next Casually Criterion, we're going to have the link in the show notes, so be sure and check that out.
Yes.
All right, guys, are we ready to go ahead and go over the Criterion release announcements for September and October of 2019?
You bet.
I'm so excited.
I could tell. Calm down.
You're a circus over there.
Yeah, bring it down a notch, will you?
Yeah, goodness.
You on the mark!
Justin, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So on September 3rd, we have Fists in the Pocket by Marco Bellocchio.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a Blu-ray upgrade from a previous DVD.
Mm-hmm.
Then on September 10th, we have The Cloud-Capped Star by Ritwik Ghatak.
Nice. I was wondering how you were going to do that.
So was I, right up until I said it. And then September 17th, we have two releases, Clooney Brown by Ernst Lubitsch and Polyester by John Waters.
All right, yeah, and on September 24th, we have The Circus coming with Charlie Chaplin in it and directing. Also on the 24th, we have Local Hero, directed by Bill Forsyth. October 8th, we have three silent classic films by Joseph von Sternberg. And October 15th, we have Haxan by Benjamin Christensen.
Nice. And then on October 22nd, we have When We Were Kings by Leon Gast. Also on October 29th, we have Maedawan by John Sayles. And then Spine number 1000, also being released on October 29th. We have Godzilla, the Showa-era films from 1954 to 1975 box set.
Ooh.
That's the big one. That's the one we've all been guessing, or at least by all, I mean everyone who's into Criterion.
Yeah, the one we delayed an entire week of recording this episode for.
That's right.
Yeah.
They for some reason, they announced everything else but that one and said we have to wait a week.
Yeah. So was it worth all the anticipation? Are you disappointed in number 1000?
Only because I'm not that, I wouldn't say I'm disappointed, actually. That's a stretch, but like I'm not that familiar with the Godzilla films. I've seen like the original Godzilla, and I've seen the Matthew Broderick Godzilla, which I don't really. That doesn't affect like how I view Godzilla films in general. That particular film, but so I'm not familiar with these films at all to get like really really excited. I am curious.
Did you see the 2014 one?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, or the recent one that came out this year. I haven't seen yet.
Oh yeah, I haven't either.
But I'm curious about him. The thing is, for me, I'll need to watch a couple of them before I drop the kind of money I would need to drop on this box set.
Oh sure. Yeah.
Lucky for you, they're on Criterion Channel, so you can check them out. Yeah. I've actually just recently, and before this was announced, like what I'll do instead of listening to podcasts, I'll listen to like commentaries on films from the Criterion Channel as I'm doing other stuff. And I actually just recently listened to the American version commentary, the one with Perry Mason in it. I forget Bill Burr is his real name. And then I also listened to the original Japanese commentary, and they were both really interesting and well done. The commentaries were. So I'm excited about it. Dropping $100 or like it'd be like $100 in a 50% off sale is always a bit tough for me. Like if I want to make that splurge.
Yeah,
it's a nice looking box set though.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's clever. Like a lot of people thought they were going to play off of the number 1000 and stuff, but they actually kind of played off of the spine because Godzilla has this little like spiny. There's a word for that. I'm sure that's way more scientific, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, his plates, those little dinosaur things. So beyond the Godzilla stuff, let's talk about some of the other releases. Have you guys seen any of these? I know, Justin, I know you've seen at least one of them.
Yeah, so I have seen 2 of these, in fact.
Okay.
The first one being Fists in the Pocket, which was a blind buy, the old DVD version, which I still have the DVD version.
Yeah, I've seen that exact
ago.
copy. That's when I saw the movie, because I think you were like, hey, you should check this out. So I did.
Yeah, it's a just kind of like bizarre little movie. I don't remember a ton about it other than there's a guy who seems to be some sort of like have some like mental issues, and at some point I guess I'm spoiling it here maybe because I don't remember what point in the movie it happens, but at some point he decides that he needs to like off his whole family, like that it's like the best thing for him to do.
Yeah,
which is
pretty dark little movie.
Yeah, and the other one that I've seen is The Circus by Charlie Chaplin.
Nice.
And that is actually way back in the day when Hulu was first coming around and like being noticed. It had a huge Criterion Collection section, and that was like the big draw of Hulu for me. The very first movie, the second I started my free trial of Hulu way back then, the very first movie I watched was The Circus.
Nice.
So it's been a while since I've seen it, but I enjoyed it as I enjoy most of Chaplin's films.
Yeah. I also saw The Circus back on Hulu. Man, I miss whenever Criterion was on Hulu back in the simple days. Back when they had like their own Criterion section.
Mm-hmm. It's great that they have like their whole Criterion channel. They do have their own app and streaming service and all that. That's great. But like, there's something so nice about there's something so nice about having it within the Hulu.
Well, and it makes it so prestigious looking for even casual film watchers that would have Hulu. They'd be like, what is this thing called Criterion with a bunch of apparently artsy things in my Hulu that I used to watch like, some crappy ABC show.
Have either of you guys seen any of those films?
I've seen Haxan.
Oh, yeah.
Haxan? Yeah, I'm interested in that one. I don't think I've seen any of these. I'm excited. Madawan? How is Haxan though, Mike?
Well, it's more interesting than it is like enjoyable, right? But
yeah,
it still is interesting, and I can see how it's important and why Criterion would want to release it.
Yeah,
sure.
They released it before, so this is actually
an
upgrade from the DVD. So we're getting a Blu-ray of it now. I think it's spine number 134.
Yeah, it's early on in the Criterion collection for sure.
Yeah, the other things that intrigue me, Ernst Lubitsch, I've seen Design for Living, one of the other Criterion releases of his films, and I really enjoyed that one a lot. So the more they release of his stuff, that's cool for me. And John Waters is a director I've never watched much of, so like Polyester, like that cover just makes me laugh and really makes me want to see the movie.
That cover is possibly my favorite cover in the Criterion collection.
I totally understand that.
Also, the movie, I believe, like it's been in the Criterion collection before on Laserdisc, And when it was released in Laserdisc, and I think when it was released in the theaters, it had a scratch and sniff card. So on the Laserdisc, it came with a scratch and sniff card, and then also I believe it's going to be coming with a scratch and sniff card in this edition. So that should be fun.
Yeah, and
fun.
I guess if you're listening and you don't want to take the time to go look up the polyester cover, it's basically ripping off this sort of like Harlequin romance novel that like normally would have like shirtless guys and stuff on it, and it's just super, super colorful, and it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also, yeah, Metawan, Chris, you saw that or you mentioned that earlier. I like John Sayles, at least what I've seen. So I'm always down to check out more John Sayles.
Yeah, and that's another cover I really like. It's a guy facing off against a bunch of other guys. It looks very Western.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And the last thing, this isn't my own personal recommendation, but I got a text from a friend earlier who's very well aware of what the Criterion Collection is. I'm not sure how much he actually goes out of his way to watch Criterion specific films, but he texted me earlier today with like a picture of the When We Were Kings, which is a documentary, I believe, about Muhammad Ali.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool. Yeah.
So my friend has seen this before, and he was like, "Are you aware this is coming out on Criterion?" Because he knows I love Criterion.
Yeah.
And have you seen it? And I said no. And he's like, "Well, you have to check it out. Like, I love this movie. I think it's really rad."
He's like, "Finally, I can talk to you about this stupid thing you like."
Right. And so it comes highly recommended by my friend Adam. I don't know if he listens to the show or not. So if you do, hey Adam, thanks for the recommendation.
Oh, the Adam I know?
The Adam you know.
Funny story, I actually met Muhammad Ali. Well, not that I remember, but when I was a baby, and my mom and
did he punch
dad
you? Is that what you don't
always
remember?
tell me the story. Yeah, he punched me out, and then he apparently said I was a cute baby, as my parents always told me that story. Yeah,
before he punched you.
Yeah, I was. The punchline to that is he had taken one too many blows to the head by that point.
So he didn't know he was wrong about your being cute.
Being cute, yeah.
Okay, I believe it. Cool. Well, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about with these movies. I don't have anything else. Anything I didn't mention, like I'm just absolutely unfamiliar with.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting few weeks. I'm actually, I don't know. I want to see the Godzilla movies, but that is a big, expensive box set. I don't know. I'm torn. There's other box sets I guess I got to get first, you know?
Yeah, I would do the Bergman box set first, I think.
Yeah. Oh, man, yeah.
Yeah, I want the Bergman box set and I guess it's not a box set, but like Showa. It's like priced similar to like box set prices, right? Like the big long documentary about the Holocaust. And then also the 3 films by Whit Stillman I want, and the 3 films by Wallace Shawn and Andre Gregory. That box set seems rad too.
You have quite the list going.
It's Justin's Christmas list, everybody, so you know what to get him.
That's right.
Indeed. All right.
I think we are done talking about those. So are you guys ready to move on to reviewing Jean-Luc Godard's Weekend?
Oh, yeah.
Weekend.
Did you guys plan that?
No.
It's funny.
Is it? Was it?
I'm trying to be supportive.
Okay.
All right, so as usual with our Criterion films, we do not do a non-spoiler section because most of these films are classic films or films that have been out for a good amount of time, decades usually. I don't think any of them have been out for over a century that we've done yet, but one day that will happen. But regardless, the films are old and we don't have to do non-spoilers for them. So if you haven't seen the film, you should pause right now, go see the film, come back, and finish listening to the episode.
Okay, guys, so Weekend, directed by Jean-Luc Godard, starring, oh my goodness, Muriel Darc, Jean Yan, and Jean-Pierre Calfon.
Perfect.
Lovely.
Okay, sure. Yeah. The IMDb synopsis says, a surreal tale of a married couple going on a road trip to visit the wife's parents with the intention of killing them for the inheritance.
That's what the plot of the movie is. I'm not sure that's really what the movie's about.
Yeah. Yeah. I had forgotten kind of what the plot was, really, until I read that.
Right. That's perfectly understandable.
All right, guys. So, what is your relationship with Jean-Luc Godard? Have you seen Weekend before? And what are your thoughts on Weekend versus the other movies that you may or may not have seen?
Do you want me to go first? Because this was my choice that won our poll.
Yes, please. Go first with talking about this movie. I want to see how you approach this.
I'm nervous about stepping up.
Yeah.
Well, so Jean-Luc Godard is one of the filmmakers that I started watching when I first got into Criterion Collection and kind of into a little bit deeper into films than just watching like the newest, like more critically acclaimed movies. Is when I started digging deep into old film. I found Jean-Luc Godard very early on. I think maybe the first Criterion Collection film I owned when I knew what Criterion Collection was Band of Outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
That was the film, actually, like, I think the first Criterion films I watched, I think, were either Band of Outsiders, Breathless, and Yojimbo, I think, because Chris let me borrow those from Blockbuster back when we all worked there.
Right. I'm pretty sure I saw Band of Outsiders on that copy, like, because of Chris before I had actually bought it and owned it. But that was definitely the first Godard film that I saw. And then, of course, that segued into Breathless and other stuff. And I kind of fell in love with all of these Godard films that I was seeing. I was just kind of enamored by what I would call ballsy filmmaking. And I think that the films that I watched first and like early on were all of like his best stuff too, or like his most accessible at least.
Mm-hmm.
And once I hit through those and I started going into the later Godard, the sort of like lesser entries, I guess, or less critically acclaimed, less like generally loved Godard films, his films get more and more difficult to watch. They're difficult to parse, to understand.
Definitely, yeah.
And get everything that's going on. Like, there's so many Godard films that I walk away from being like, I feel kind of dumb now because I don't understand these things. But I love his spirit. So 9 times out of 10, I am entertained by the movie, even when I'm not understanding what's going on, because he's doing things that are unconventional with sound or the way shots are cut, or even like the framing and the camera movement is like very unconventional. And so I'm usually entertained. And I think no other film in Godard's like filmography rides that line of keeping me entertained while being like completely lost on many of the things that he's talking about. Then like Weekend it rides that line so well. And like at times where I'm like, I don't know what's going on and I'm not quite entertained, but then at times like he'll always pick me back up with something. So I'm a little on the fence about Weekend, but overall I think if you get down on yourself about not understanding everything in it, it's like a straight ticket to not enjoying the film.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair, for sure.
Yeah, but if you kind of let some of the stuff you don't get just go and kind of watch the ride that you're on, it can be fun. It's not my favorite Godard film. I think this is my second time to watch it, and the whole reason I picked it was because the first time I was like, what? I don't understand this.
Yeah.
So the second time I think was a much easier watch than the first time for me. But so I'll stop there because I'm going on a little bit long, but we can get into more details about it later. So who wants to go next?
I'll go. So yeah, I'm right there with you. This is, of all the Godard films I've seen, this is definitely the most challenging one. I also have not seen a lot of Godard films. That guy makes a lot of movies. Most of what I've seen is from the 60s, some from the 70s. This was not the first Godard film I watched. I definitely watched like Band of Outsiders, Pierre Lafaux, Alphaville, a lot of his like early French New Wave stuff. And I enjoyed most of it, right? I think this is the first film I saw from him that I didn't enjoy enough to want to watch again right away and try to get more out of it, because It is pretty unaccessible. I think this is kind of the beginning of where he begins his getting even less accessible than he was before.
That's very true. I've seen some of the films immediately surrounding this one. I think one of them might have been before La Chinoise, or I don't know how to say that, but that might be before or after. But I've seen like a couple surrounding this film, definitely one or two after, and like he just goes even further into inaccessibility after this for a while.
It's almost like he's daring you to like his movies at certain times. I think this movie's a little more accessible than something like 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her. But yeah, anyway, I enjoyed it more the second time. I did. But I'm still kind of in the place of where does it become less about enjoying it and more about absorbing it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's not really a movie that I could say I enjoyed or would really recommend, because I don't really know anyone in real life who would get any amount of enjoyment of watching this movie besides maybe you guys. But what I would say is it is interesting enough, ballsy enough, and unique enough to definitely give it a shot, because he's putting a lot of stuff into this movie. So what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, this is a tough one. You mentioned you just finished editing on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and in that conversation we talked about how the Manson family murders can present a barrier to get into that film specifically. Well, I feel like there's a much larger barrier here, because you really need to know the politics of the time, you know, and like you're gonna have to do research in order to kind of get what he's talking about, right? It's I think what you would call like a zeitgeist film, because it's very of its time. So us going back and watching it makes it much more difficult for us to understand and identify with. It's a very dark movie, funny. It kind of reminded me of, not as violent or bleak as these two movies, but it did have a feeling of funny games and Solo, because the commentary that's happening around it, you know, is darkly comic, and I think that those other two movies have aspects of that in those. This one's not quite as tough to watch as those other two movies, I don't think, but it's definitely there.
Let me ask you a question real quick.
Okay.
While we're on that train of thought, do you find any influence in this film on Sorry to Bother You?
Yes! Oh, I'm so glad. I thought about this earlier, and I'm glad you reminded me. And yes, I do see that influence, and I think Sorry to Bother You is I wonder what it'll be like to watch Sorry to Bother You in 10 to 20 years, right? I still think that there's enough story in Sorry to Bother You that it won't be as inaccessible. But yes, I do see that influence on Sorry to Bother You, and I yeah, for sure.
Cool. Glad you agree.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about Sorry to Bother You until you just brought it up, but no, that makes total sense. I completely get the connection there.
Yeah. One of the things, you know, like just like you guys, Godard and Truffaut are kind of how I got into film, you know, and mainly Godard's films that got me into his films were, you know, when he like loved film, you know, and he just kind of wanted to break the rules a little bit in it, but he ultimately, I think, had a great passion for film. And I think at some point he kind of turned into a grumpy old man or like it just feels like he doesn't love film as much as he used to, or he did in the early days and I know that he's about to go take like a year off and become a political activist after this film, so maybe his mind isn't completely on this. And I know like he was pretty grumpy and hated the actress and hated his producers while he was making this film, so maybe there was like I feel like I can feel that pessimism and like negativity in this film. It's not a very positive film, I don't think.
I think I read somewhere that this is his most like high budget film, and
is it
most like commercial in terms of like process. Like I think it had big backing and stuff compared to his other work.
It certainly seems to have a larger budget than some of his previous French New Wave stuff.
Yeah, so this is kind of what Godard does when he gets money.
Yeah. I can understand why he had a problem with the producers then, because I can imagine they were like, "What are you doing?"
I could imagine being a producer was not fun on this movie. It is technically, well, there are aspects of it that are technically well made, and the parts that feel like they're not technically well made are very much choices, I think. So
Yeah.
those are kind of my thoughts. It's a tough movie, and I think this conversation is going to make it a better movie or make it more worthwhile to
that's setting a high bar, man.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
I think before we go too much further, we didn't get a lot of like questions, but we did get a lot of comments about this film, and they're just kind of mostly general opinions. So I think we should just quickly give out some other listeners' opinions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'll start off with Instagram. We have The Big Bounce says, great first half, very pretentious second. Not wrong.
I'm curious as of to where he draws the line. Whenever it stops being good and starts being pretentious.
I think it's, for me, not quite halfway into the movie. I would say great first quarter, pretentious last three quarters.
I would say
the first scene is pretty pretentious.
Yeah, I would say the whole thing's kind of pretentious, but I think it stops being accessible somewhere about 30 to 40% through, like completely. Like Pierre Lafaux is pretentious. Like all his movies are a little pretentious, right? But they've all got that charm to them about them. This one is like inaccessibly pretentious at times, but still worth watching.
Sure. And so then we also have HK Cinema Appreciation Society. This is also on Instagram, says favorite Godard movie, Brilliant Madness. So that's kind of a different opinion than I think we all have.
Yeah, I know. I wish he would have sent more.
I know. Like if you're listening, HK Cinema Appreciation Society, please elaborate.
Yeah, send more. We'll read it on the next Casually Criterion.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. One more, I think, or two more. One from Twitter, Max Green at Max Green Movies says, I love Weekend. I really enjoy how Godard orchestrates a technical achievement in filming that long take of the traffic jam, but constantly uses title cards to undercut the cohesiveness of the shot, which allows the viewer to wonder if the intertitles devalue or enhance the shot. But he loves it. That's another love.
Yeah.
And of course, we'll talk about the traffic jam shot later.
Indeed.
Lastly, on Facebook, Isaac Soto says, I found it utterly impenetrable the first time I saw it, but that was a couple of years ago, and I've done a lot of reading since.
Oh, there we go. That's my problem. I didn't read in between.
Yeah. I've read, but not the right things, I think.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I have read things in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think the real point to take away from that, and I think both of you kind of mentioned this, or at least one of you did, but the film asks a lot of you. Like, you need to know a lot. And researching and reading is almost required to be fully on board with this film. And I can't even imagine how much you would have to read and how many different things you would need to know to be fully on board with the film.
Yeah, to comprehend every single thing that's said and what happens.
Yeah. Rare is the person that is that way, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So we mentioned the traffic scene earlier, so let's go ahead and just dive into that. I think that's the most famous of the scenes in this movie, right? Like anytime I see any kind of reference to it, it's usually in this scene.
Yeah, it's definitely the thing that I knew about the film before I watched it.
Yeah, and I would say that that's probably where like at least 60% of the budget for this movie went.
Oh my gosh, I can't, like, I've made films, of course, coming from film school, as have you, Mike, and like Chris, you've been on film sets with us and stuff. Like, I can't wrap my head around the logistics of doing that. It like gives me a headache.
Yeah, like one long tracking shot, and in it you just see like I don't even want to call them our heroes, but our main characters pull up in their car. Everyone's honking, and there's a huge line of traffic that goes on seemingly forever, right? And in this line of traffic, you have people honking and screaming and hanging out of their cars. You have little kids running around all over the place. You have old people sitting in the middle of the road,
playing chess or having a picnic.
Yeah, everyone doing all manner of things that you can do while stuck in traffic, even things you can't do. And our characters are basically driving by every single person and watching them and honking and trying to squeeze their way in, but always kind of opting to keep driving, right? And eventually, as they get to the end of it, you see that, yeah, this is a huge wreck. Right? Like, this is what's causing the traffic jam. People died. And no one seems to really care or value that, or they don't seem too worried about it. They're all very much focused on what they are doing or how bored they are or entertaining themselves. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It reminded me a lot of that first scene where those people are like arguing on the street and then that one person gets run over.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's almost like everyone's on the verge of like this heightened reality where they all hate each other, which very much feels like today in a lot of ways. What do you guys think?
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a disregard for others in that. Our main characters, especially just when they get to the end of the traffic jam through the wreck, they kind of get through it and then just like zoom on, and don't seem to pay much attention to it. Also, they don't seem
and they
to have
cut in front of everybody who was like rightfully in the line before them too.
Exactly.
Right.
They have no concern for like the etiquette of like, I don't want to say doing the right thing necessarily, but like, waiting your turn.
Other people's needs. They don't care about, anything but themselves.
Well, I would argue that everyone in that traffic jam is like that to a certain degree. Our main characters might be the worst of all of them, right? And we know they're pretty crappy people. I don't think they do anything good in the whole movie or selfless. But, everyone in that traffic jam is being a little insensitive, right? It seems like very much a reflection on, when you drive by a car accident and you don't really seem to care, It's like modern day living and modern day society kind of makes us ugly to a certain extent.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. It's and in this film, they're almost reduced down. Like I was reminded of Mad Max or like an apocalypse type world, right? Because as you go through this long traffic jam sequence, there's cars like littered everywhere that aren't necessarily in the traffic jam. They're just like they've been in wrecks before and they've been discarded. And so it almost feels like this, and especially the further you go into the film, but it almost feels like a post-apocalyptic type world. There's violence that people are doing to each other, and it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I would say maybe even like a hell or a purgatory type world.
Yeah, I could see that.
Going back to the traffic jam too, it's like everybody, wants to get through this traffic jam, and the wreck is more of like an inconvenience than like somebody's life. But I think the overall statement or thing that I'm getting from not just this, but from also the amount of cars littered everywhere in this like world, and wrecks and like fire and death and like blood that's everywhere due to car wrecks. Like I think there is some sort of comment on like how we get as a capitalist society, or when the car, I mean, I don't know if there's like a better symbol of capitalism than the car. Like, and I think the car, when we can get places faster, we don't notice the things around us, right? Or we want to get somewhere fast, and now we can't go back to getting there slowly. So I pull a lot of like anti-capitalism out of this film.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely Godard for you. I also kind of see it, like we mentioned earlier, like, the car wreck at the beginning of the movie, but there's also even the child that's like squirting people with a water gun or teasing. What is he doing? And then like the old man comes out and tries to shoot at him with a shotgun.
Oh, you're talking about the kid with the bow and arrow at the very beginning.
Yeah, that's what it is. And anyway, so there's this very much like this sense of losing touch with what's important, I guess, or kind of being in like a pessimistic or cynical state of mind. I don't know.
Yeah,
sure.
I see the losing touch with each other and seeing everybody as the enemy in the way of your own needs.
Yeah, not necessarily the enemy, but I would say more of like everyone else is someone who is an extra in the movie that is your life.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good way to put that.
It is. And I think let's not forget that our two main characters' motivation, the whole reason they're on this trip is, as we said in the synopsis of the film, like it's greed, it's wanting money, like in disregarding the death of their own parents, like to the point where they might kill them, I think is like the plan.
Mm-hmm. They've been trying to murder him for a while. They've been putting poison in his food, I believe.
Yeah.
Every Sunday for the last 2 years, I think.
So it's all about more money, and I think it's no coincidence that at one point in the traffic jam we pass a Shell truck.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that definitely is no coincidence at all.
It's not just the car they happen to get, like
right. Yeah, they weren't like, let's find, okay, we need to spice up the different kinds of cars in here.
Let's get a Shell truck. I kind of want to talk about the opening scenes if we're done with the traffic jam.
The only thing I want to talk about with the traffic jam before we move on, and this is pointed out on Twitter, the Max Green comment we read a second ago, but there is the title cards. I think it's when we get to like the bus. It's somewhere in the middle of the traffic jam that come in, and I think they say weekend and give you some times and dates or something like that. But like, I am willing to bet, and I don't know for sure, and this information may be out there already, but I'm willing to bet that Godard really did the one long take and then in the editing room deliberately cut it up with a title to be like, yes, I did this, but I'll also cut it up. Like I took the time to do it as one long shot, but I'm gonna interrupt it, and I could have done it differently if I wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly sounds like something he would do, which is just like go through the trouble to do it and then be like, but who cares, really?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's funny. Like he's undercutting himself, and
yes.
Yeah.
That's one of those things that I enjoy about him. It's like this sort of like wry sense of humor towards filmmaking that he has in his other films. It's a little less entertaining in this one than it is in other films, but that's one moment where it's pretty entertaining.
Yeah, like there's almost this attitude of like, well, I know how to make a movie, but what's a good way to how you don't make a movie generally?
Yeah,
how do I do that?
I'm gonna break the rules on purpose. And,
and that almost seems to be what everything he's done up to this point. And now he's like, that's probably like what you kind of mentioned earlier, Chris, is that he seems bored. Mm-hmm. It seems like he's more going into like the realm of politics and getting more or I guess less and less accessible, because he's already done, a few movies up to this point. I don't know how many exactly, but he was very prolific in the 60s.
I think this year alone, there's 3, or he came out with 2 other movies in the same year as Weekend.
Exactly. So I imagine at this point, he's just on a manic working ethic, and he's just kind of like, he's done. He's tackled every other hill narratively at this point. So now it's kind of like time to get weird.
Weird and I want to say preachy, but just kind of like talking a whole lot about politics and
definitely
the state of society and culture. And I mean, he's pushing agenda around this time and beyond more than he's pushing plot.
Yeah, so much so that I doubt anyone would watch this movie and be converted to his idea of thinking unless they already agreed with him.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I don't think he's even interested in trying to sway anyone. It's almost like he's interested in telling you, if you don't agree, you're wrong.
And I think it would segue really quickly. Chris, I know you want to talk about the opening scenes, but we'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
This film came out in 1967, and I think it's no coincidence that like the political and social commentary, like fire that's within this movie, is happening in 1967, and May of 1968, there's a giant like political upheaval in France. So I think in some ways you can see it's almost like a boiling pot. A pot starting to boil, maybe not quite boiling yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Watching this film, and I think you can feel that. Like, and it's one of the things that like resonates the strongest with me is just this feeling of turmoil and like I said, like a boiling pot. Something ready to blow over, and that definitely happens because there's a bunch of riots and strikes and like protests going on in France.
Yeah, you can almost like feel it in the air. It's almost like really palpable. And we kind of mentioned this before we started recording. This same time period is depicted in a Bernardo Bertolucci movie, The Dreamers, starring Eva Green and Michael Pitt, which
Very
is
good movie.
Yeah, I like that movie quite a bit. So if this time period interests you in those riots and Godard in this period, there's a lot of film references from that movie.
Yeah, they're definitely. Some of the characters at least are French and interested in the French riots, and they're all obsessed with Godard.
Yeah.
And Truffaut and other French New Wave.
Yeah, I think even someone plays Godard in the movie, like far away.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I remember that vaguely. All right, Chris, do you want to talk about those opening scenes now?
I think he does.
No, I'm good.
Oh.
All right. I'm just joking. Yeah, so I want to just briefly hit it because I think that these are kind of the most normal that this movie is. But especially the sound in this and the lighting, and it's certainly, I think, Godard breaking the rules on purpose. But like that long story that she tells about the threesome that she has, and then the music coming in and out. And I was actually curious if like I understood French and didn't have subtitles, if I could hear everything she's saying, right? Because the music can come in and it's really loud and it kind of almost covers up what she's saying, and then the music goes out. What did you guys think about that opening sequence? And
I definitely had the same thought. Like, I remember as it was going on, like, man, if I didn't have subtitles, I would be really unable to even hear her voice very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read a comment in an essay or an article or something I was reading on Weekend that was saying that the music there does drown out the voice.
I imagine if you speak French, it's really frustrating because you're in the theater and you're like, oh man, what is the story? Ooh, what? Shut up, music. No, hang on. What?
I think that's part of the point,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Like telling the sexual story, but then like robbing
you hear it.
of certain moments makes you strain your ears.
Yeah. Be like, huh?
And the lighting's really weird in that too. Like, is it well lit, or Justin? You know more. You and Mike both know more about that. It just seemed really weird or washed out.
It seemed really dramatically lit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I would say. It's like the characters are not well lit in the sense that you can see them, but if you want to say well lit in terms of being intentionally lit that way, then I would say it's intentionally lit that way.
Well, it felt like the characters were almost like imagining themselves. I kind of mentioned this earlier. It feels like the characters are imagining themselves in a really like a crime movie and kind of romanticizing their own crappy behavior. And this almost seems like them imagining like the intro to their movie, or like, you know what I mean? Like them in like a really dramatic situation kind of movie thing before they go off on their adventure. And it seems like a lot of this movie is them and other characters besides them kind of reckoning with real life through the lens of like storytelling and pop culture in weird ways.
Yeah, I think it seems like the characters are aware that they're in a movie at times.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or at least pretending like they are, and then doing terrible things because they think they're cool. Or,
right.
You know?
And something that I think is really interesting about that scene is I recently rewatched Bergman's Persona.
Yeah. I thought a lot of Persona during
During the movie, or that scene particularly?
that scene.
Yeah, I think that scene is like a direct. I don't know if it's a parody or a homage to Persona, because there is a scene in Persona where one of the characters, the main character, is recounting a sexual experience in a very, very similar manner. And maybe that's why this is lit the way that it is and is like kind of washed out looking and stuff, because this is a color film, but he's mocking or calling back to a black and white film.
Well, and also the music kind of rising and drowning out the dialogue. It's almost like homages and turning movie tropes on their head within the opening scene. Because I guess Persona probably would have been a pretty big movie within his circles at this time.
Oh, yeah,
definitely.
I don't. It's been a long time since I've seen Persona, but I don't recall it going quite so over the top as this one, and that seems to be like what you're saying.
Well, I think that's why this one does
parody.
go over the top.
Yeah.
So.
And the other thing that I thought of when I was watching it, but like, you know, the camera kind of moves in and out throughout the scene, like and at different times. But this is, I don't know how to like phrase this eloquently, but like it reminded me of masturbating.
Okay.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like masturbation and like stroking things, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
Which would like coincide with what is being said.
Yeah. In the titillation, he's trying to make you feel and then rob you of by like doing things like boosting up the music and.
Yeah. I just find like I guess I was searching for a reason of like, what is this camera movement supposed to make me think of and like feel? So maybe I'm overthinking it with that.
I think it's really easy in that scene because it goes on for so long and it's not that interesting of a story. You kind of feel like the husband.
It's not like the story in Sallow.
Yeah. Well, Sallow has interesting aspects to it that are very different than this, for me at least. So in Sallow, the prostitute talks about these things to titillate the people that are listening to her, right? And in this, like we were talking about, she's very much like that prostitute. She's not actually a prostitute, but she's telling the story, and then of course, like he's robbing you of it, like you guys are saying. So that's very interesting. Maybe Persona or maybe Sallow. Which one came out first? Did Sallow come out after this, or?
Sallow did come out after this. Sallow came out in 1976.
Oh, well, I guess
way after this.
Yeah. This may have influenced that, perhaps.
Okay, so what we talked about earlier is the entertainment value of this film or how entertaining this film is, and that it's difficult and inaccessible. I think a big part of that is there are several what I would describe as overly long sequences, or what is the word that we use for like the slow paced scenes? We eloquently described it recently.
Deliberately paced.
Deliberately paced scenes or sequences in this movie. One of which we've already discussed, the traffic jam. The other one I think is the musical performance in like that sort of like rural. I don't know what you would call that. That's not quite a town, but it's something
like
the farm.
Yeah,
farm. Yeah. And then there's also the scene with the two guys eating sandwiches or eating bread.
Oh yeah.
Against the truck where they're doing the voiceover for each other, and you're just watching one guy eat a sandwich while you're hearing the person next to him talk, but you're not seeing them talk.
Yep.
Right.
All very long scenes. Do any of those scenes entertain you and like work for as long as they are, or do you kind of think all of them are there to like intentionally try your patience?
I think I enjoyed the traffic jam scene. At least on a technical level, like I enjoyed watching it happen. Does that make sense?
Right.
That one was interesting. The one at the very end where it's the two guys talking over each other, like what would you call that? Like what is that?
Voiceover?
What is that
I don't
word?
know.
Yeah, I guess voiceover. Anyways, the two guys talking while the other one's on screen. That kind of tried my patience a little bit for sure. And the piano one did as well. Like, it just kind of kept going. And then, the other person that I thought of, too, especially after having watched Too Old to Die Young, it reminded me of Nicholas Winding Refn, because Nicholas Winding Refn will just let his camera go. Everybody stands still, kind of, and the camera pans around. It very deliberately paced, almost to a detriment of the film.
Right.
So, yeah.
What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I agree. I think the voiceover in the garbage truck stuff is probably the hardest for me to get through. At least the other times the camera's moving. So like on a very basic level, your eye always has something to look at.
Yeah.
But with the garbage truck thing, it's very much just like a close-up of the person who's not talking.
I wonder if the garbage truck thing, at the very end of that sequence, they're still talking, but we show the two leads, and they are very bored. And I wonder if, I imagine that he's trying to call us out because we've become bored by it as well. So he's like, you're just like these people.
Yeah, they want to get on with their adventure plot.
Yeah, where you should be listening and subscribing to these guys' theories.
Yes.
Type thing.
If I remember correctly, the things they're talking about is, political, social commentary. I think they're talking about like civil rights type stuff at certain points because one of the guys is a black guy. And I think, I don't know if he's saying this, but I feel like I'm bored listening to this, but like I shouldn't be because it's relatively important stuff for them, at least at the time. Maybe I'm bored because this stuff isn't like as quite as like a pressing of a political issue, because a lot of the civil rights movements and stuff have happened,
Well, sure. Also, though, I think he's intentionally filming it in a way that's not entertaining, right? Like I said, he's very much showing you the person who's not talking. They're eating a sandwich. You know what I mean? Like, he's very much filming it in not an interesting way. So I think he's taking challenging material, trying to make you bored, and then also, kind of like Chris was saying, then make you feel bad about being bored later on. But, he's also right to an extent, which is that, like, we didn't have the attention span to not be bored. He was right.
Yeah, true.
So,
do you think there's any of it, like, not wanting to get his message muddled by other cinematic stuff, Like, if those sort of speeches had been going on over the traffic jam sequence, for example, I think I would not know what they were talking about and not have, like, paid as much attention to the content of what they're saying.
Yeah, maybe. I would have, this is him intentionally, taking the craft and trying to challenge the viewer, right? But there are things he could have done to make it more entertaining, But, you could have people talking to one another instead of talking at the camera. But, especially later on in his career, he likes to do these things where like people talking directly at the camera and kind of summing up things instead of actually having real scenes. Like in Pierre LaFaux, I think there's a scene where like two people kind of basically just describe what happens in the scene, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
And so I think he's He's bored of narrative or something, it seems like. He wants to just be his own thing, which he is at this point in time.
Yeah. So do you think that is the message, or the message is about how we're listening to that or bored by that? Or do you think the message is what's being said, or both?
I think the message is what's being said, and then also the fact that you are bored should make you feel bad about it. That's how I took it, at least. Like, he intentionally makes you bored with an important message going on. That way, later on, he can make the point of like, hey, look, us in real life, in society, you're bored and not paying attention to these things nearly as much as you should be. Kind of like a parallel to real life, but in the form of watching this movie.
Would you say then that this movie, or especially that scene, is a call to action?
I mean, yeah, I think anyone who gets political with their movies is probably trying to get people to be riled up to an extent, Otherwise, what's the point of
making it? Yeah,
getting your message out there.
I agree with that. Do you think that, as we talked about earlier, this is kind of a post-apocalyptic sort of world? Do you think that if we are in an apocalyptic sort of world, that it's a result of capitalism, and that's why there's so many cars piled up, and like almost like every big like location change is like started out with a car crash?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, if not capitalism, then just kind of modern society in general. Probably capitalism. I think a lot of this movie is trying to not necessarily be post-apocalyptic, but what I think this is kind of saying, this is the heightened reality we're eventually going to get to.
Or Godard's vision of what the world is.
Right, yeah,
now.
his version of where we're headed. Almost like, how Mike Judge did Idiocracy.
Right.
Yeah,
this is an interesting comparison.
Well, I think it's the same idea behind them, only one goes about it in a very traditional comedy way and the other one goes about it Godard's way. But I think it's the same principle there, right? Which is just like, look at the way we're going now. This is the way we're heading, towards a bunch of basically apathetic, narcissistic, evil people.
I don't know that he's totally wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this through a 2019 lens, and I get more from it today in this climate than I did the first time I watched it, probably in 2010 or 2011 or something.
Yeah. Do you guys want to move on to like some of the ending sort of segment of the film? I know we haven't touched on like a lot of their sort of like trip through the countryside when they're walking, and like all of those like fictional characters or non-fictional characters, even some of them from like
I'm fine history. Not being super specific. I mean, we can just kind of talk broadly about the movie.
I think the middle of the film is just populated with so many
interesting things. Yeah.
That like most of which were over my head. So like I don't even know what to say about them,
Exactly.
Yeah.
The only thing I do want to talk about specifically is like the whole ending sequence thing where they meet up with these I guess like revolutionary type people, or people seems like they're living out in the forest.
Oh yeah. One of them goes by the Searchers and the other one goes by Johnny Guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is silly. When someone goes by a Battleship Potemkin, I think, at one point.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess that's just a fun little film reference. I don't know that those particular titles tie into anything.
Well, they're all kind of Western action movies, like Western-ish style and genre, not necessarily in culture. But like Battleship Potemkin is very much a violent movie. The Searchers is like a Western epic. Johnny Guitar is kind of like a pulpy Western. Mm-hmm. I took this kind of as like very much in a sense that pop culture and movies are kind of influencing people who are kind of playing hero in their own movie, in their own story, or kind of romanticizing the violence that they're doing and comparing it to the romanticized violence in the movies, and kind of losing touch with the reality of what they're doing and the violence that's actually going on around them.
And I'm wondering if it's an extension of what we talked about earlier with like the traffic jam and this idea of not considering other people like in an empathetical sense of like trying to get ahead and like not worrying about how you're inconveniencing others or not being fair to others. But like is the most extreme example of this like what happens when they kill the guy and our main character Roland, and they eat him. It's like the ultimate like you're sustaining yourself and moving forward in life by literally eating someone else.
Well, I mean, it also could be that he is having us look at these revolutionaries as heroes because our main characters were crappy people and they were going to do terrible things, and they're the ones who don't care. And it could be that the revolutionaries in the woods who are shaped by art and wonderful art are smarter and more elevated above these people. And the best way to stop capitalism and capitalists, which are our main characters, are to, destroy them and eat them or adapt them into your society.
Right. The only way that these characters, our main characters, are going to contribute to this world is by eating them. They can provide sustenance for you. Other than that, they're not going to help this world or contribute in any meaningful way. I think that it can be seen that way as well.
Sure. So it's almost like we're celebrating the cannibalism. Is that what, maybe?
Yeah.
Well, I almost think the cannibalism is more of like a metaphor than anything, which is like capitalists do nothing but consume. So,
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's just kind of like a way, like this is how you ultimately destroy it: is radicalize or destroy.
Yeah, literally consume them.
Yeah.
So I had another thing too that kind of deals with the end, and it's the girl. So like at the beginning, there's the threesome story, and they talk about like eggs and stuff like that, and at the very end, in just the weirdest way, he opens her legs and starts cracking an egg, and then stuffs her with a fish, I believe. But like, is that a tie-in? Do those things tie together in any way? Is it foreshadowing? I don't know. Like, and if so, if they do tie together, what is there a greater meaning to it? I don't know if I'm seeing too much in it, or I'm not sure.
I remind me, are they torturing her in that scene, or are they doing it for pleasure? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's really weird because I'm not sure. I feel like they're about to eat her because they said like you can screw her before you eat her, and I feel like they're like doing a turducken because then they stuff her with the fish.
A turducken.
Human, fishing. Anyways, so I think that they're preparing her to eat. I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, because he's cracking the eggs on the two other dead people as well with that giant sword. He's cracking the eggs.
Oh, right.
So yeah. What do you think?
I don't know if it's just kind of dramatic irony that we get this story of her being sexually pleasured by the cracking of an egg, right? Because she says it never came that hard before. It was like her hardest orgasm she ever had, something like that, right?
Yeah, when she orgasms, she cracks the egg.
That's right. And the dramatic irony of like the beginning of the film being this like height of like sexual pleasure, and then now the same thing is being done to her at like the lowest of point in life where you're experiencing like ultimate violence and being eaten.
Well, I was actually wondering that exact same thing. Do we know what Godard's stance on sexual promiscuity is? Like, is that scene at the beginning and the fact that our main characters are such monsters throughout the movie, are we supposed to view that scene as like it's like excess or wrong, or is it just because that's what this mirror would kind of have me believe, right?
I feel like Godard was not against promiscuity. I don't think that he necessarily. I think that there is an excess in that opening like threesome story that maybe he doesn't necessarily agree with, or it's kind of like the Solo part. Like just this excessive sex and weirdness and just trying out different things. I don't think he had a problem with sex or promiscuity.
Yeah, I feel like, and if anything, if it's any sort of like negative, like condemnation, I almost feel like it's towards them as sort of like bourgeois sort of people, and like where they go when you don't have to worry about this other stuff, and you're like sort of like higher society, I guess you have to like hit these other points to satisfy yourself because you've got what like more than regular people have, and regular people, we're striving for equality or financial wealth, or just being able to like get by. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you have it, you've got to get weird to be satisfied.
All right. Yeah.
Maybe.
Interesting.
The last thing that I have, I think, to talk about is just the connotation of the end of cinema title card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the title cards in themselves are kind of a character.
They're fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not surprised at all, and I wasn't surprised the first time I watched it, and I forgot about it, but I was like not even more not surprised having seen more Godard and knowing a little bit more about him when I watched it the second time, of seeing him like titled the end of his film as like the end of cinema. He would do that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of, I mean, do you think that goes into with what I was saying earlier, which is like he's bored by making regular narrative movies? Like he's kind of, this is him going in like full-fledged inaccessibility.
That's what makes me most agree with you on that point, is this title card.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this really marks, like, he keeps making movies, and a lot of them.
Well, sure.
Really
I mean, it's kind of like, you know, Quentin Tarantino says, like, at the end of Inglourious Bastards, like, I think this might be my masterpiece, but he's not.
Yeah.
He's not done after that.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's, like, it's almost, I'm done with traditional films. You know, like, this is the end of cinema. And you're right, is what I'm agreeing with.
Right.
You,
He may not even feel that way today if you asked him, or you know, in the 80s or whatever, or the 90s.
Yeah.
But I think at the time, in the political atmosphere that was going on at the time, I think this is his way of saying, like, all right, this is how it's going to be now if I'm going to keep
there are
making
more
movies.
important things going on.
Which seems to be the big theme that we're all taking from this movie, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It looks like he goes on to do some more like documentary, less narrative stuff after this. And so maybe for him it was like he was, like you said, bored, maybe less interested in doing cinema and more interested in tackling other things. Maybe he was thinking like, I may not ever make another movie again.
Right. I mean, you can only turn cinema on its head so many times in less than 10
Right.
years, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You keep turning on its head, eventually you end up back where you started.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe at a time he was feeling like there was no more mountains left to climb in movies or something.
Yeah.
I remember in 2004, he came out with a movie called Notre Musique, and I was so excited for this movie because I was like, oh, Jean-Luc Godard, and I'd only seen, you know, like Breathless and, you know, his earlier movies, and I turned this movie on, and I was like, what is this? I mean, this is completely different than what I was expecting. And like, I even had to look him up. I think this was back before IMDb, but I was like, is this the Jean-Luc Godard? Did I get the directors mixed up?
His stuff now, I believe, from what I've heard, is more of the inaccessible type stuff.
Yeah. To my knowledge, I mean, listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of his narratives, the way that are accessible, the way most people could enjoy them, I think that kind of ended here and didn't really go back too much after that.
Hence the title card, too. You know, that's how I kind of...
Wow. Yeah. So anyways, I agree.
Sure. Does anybody have anything else on Weekend before we wrap this up?
No. You know what? What I want to hear from most, or hear about most, is what you, the listener, thought. Because this movie is pretty inaccessible. And if you guys took something away, or if we missed something completely, and just whatever, you know, write us in. You know, I would love to hear more thoughts and more takes on this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. It could even extend the conversation further, you know, and anything that enlightens me on this film would be great.
Yeah, I feel like the film has its entertaining moments, and we've said that it's a bit of a trial at times, but I'll say, like, talking about it has been a blast.
Yeah, I agree.
So it at least has that value to it, I think.
Yeah, we've had a couple good conversations about dense movies the past week.
Yeah.
Goodness. All right. Well, so now we will move on into our Criterion poll. You guys excited?
I am.
My favorite
ready.
time of the month.
Okay, so the new Casually Criterion poll that we're going to be doing is going to be based on the theme late 1960s American film. So basically, these are our selections, or are going to be chosen based on this theme. So by the time you're listening to this, the poll should be up on our social media. There will be a link in this episode. It'll be up for about a week. And then after that, we will have selected the next films. So Justin, why don't you tell them where the theme late 1960s American film came from?
Sure. It came from the film we just reviewed, the hot movie of the moment, I guess you would say, the Tarantino film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which takes place in the late 60s. I think it's like 1968 and then 1969. So that's basically where we're choosing from. We're choosing 1966 to 1969 are our allowable years. So
yeah, right on the verge of Hollywood changing forever.
Mm-hmm. It's a super interesting time in film, especially, everywhere, but like American film at this time just starts to get wild.
Yeah, it really does. So let's get started. Chris, what is your late 1960s American film you have chosen?
The one I picked is going to tie in really well into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I picked Valley of the Dolls by Mark Robson.
Nice.
That
will go
I've never
very
seen
well
it.
with it.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm super excited to see it. I always really heard about Beyond the Valley of the Dolls that like Roger Ebert wrote.
Yeah, the Russ Meyer.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see Valley of the Dolls. With Sharon Tate in there, it should be very interesting to watch. So yeah. Justin, what do you got?
All right, so I'm going to go with a film that I have not seen, but I have heard nothing but great things about, and I've wanted to watch it for a long time, and that is a film from 1966, which is Seconds by John Frankenheimer. It stars Rock Hudson.
Interesting.
I know very little about this film, and that's definitely something I like to go into a lot of films not knowing anything about. Like all I know of it is like the high praise. I have no idea what it's about, but I want to watch it. Dang it!
The perfect way to go into a movie.
Exactly. So yeah, that's my choice. Mike, what is yours?
Okay, so my film is actually two films that were filmed back to back in Utah in 1965 or 66 is when they were filmed, but they were released in 1966, and they are from the director Monty Hellman, who directed two westerns, both of them starring Jack Nicholson. One of them is called The Shooting, also starring Warren Oates, and the other one is called Ride in the Whirlwind. And yeah, I remember Quentin Tarantino once said that Ride in the Whirlwind was one of the best westerns he'd ever seen, which is why I thought of it for the connection to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I figured that was a good connection, and it's right on the cusp of that time that American movies are starting to change.
Yeah, and just the side note, like this double feature, when it was announced, I was hyped because...
Oh man, me too.
Yeah, forever these two films had like really terrible releases. That's how I first watched them.
Yeah.
And I remember every now and then Criterion on Facebook or Twitter would put out like a poll of like, not a poll, but a question of like, what films do you want to see us release? Like, this is your moment to give us recommendations right now.
Yeah.
And I would always go on. I think you would too, Mike. We'd always go on and just like make sure we both recommended more Monty Hellman films, particularly Ride in the Whirlwind and The Shooting.
Yeah, I even asked them one time about maybe 10 years, 8 years, something like that, before they announced this release. I remember being like, any chance for a Shooting / Ride in the Whirlwind or Monty Hellman Westerns pack or something like that? And they were like, some. As in like some chance. But
Yeah.
that's all they gave me. But
that's
I never lost hope after that because they didn't say no.
I wonder if they would say no to any movie.
Yeah, probably not.
I mean, I guess if they like, would you ever release Sleeping Beauty or something? Like, probably
something
not, because
stupid
it's impossible.
like Mary Poppins.
So you're saying there's a
Yeah.
chance?
Well, I'm not saying it's a stupid film. I'm saying like it's such a popular Disney film, like they'd never get the rights to it. So maybe they'd say no in that sense.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I said Mary Poppins. It was just like a movie that they'll never get the rights to ever.
All right.
Okay, so that's it. We've thrown down the choices.
And one more time, Mike chose The Shooting and Ride in the Whirlwind double feature. Chris chose Valley of the Dolls, and me, Justin, I chose Seconds. So those are your choices. And if you're hearing this, you can vote now. Go to our Twitter.
I have a feeling I know what's going to win.
What do you think it is?
Valley of the Dolls. Yeah, that's the one most people have heard of.
Most recognizable. I actually, while I do want to see Valley of Dolls, just like Justin, I was pretty hyped to watch The Shooting, and I've never seen Ride in the Whirlwind, so watch The Shooting again and Riding the Whirlwind the first time.
Ride in the Whirlwind. Nope, not riding.
Ride in the
Ride
Whirlwind?
in the Whirlwind.
Oh boy. Maybe we shouldn't do that movie since I can't say it.
No, yeah, that's why we should do the movie, so you have to learn.
Yeah, it's for your own good.
Yeah. I will say I do think Valley of the Dolls is going to win, but I am on such a hot streak. I'm hoping that my hot streak just carries me through.
And I also hope I win because I would love to watch those two movies again in a double feature. But also, I've also never seen Valley of the Dolls, or Seconds. So if one of you guys win, it's just a win for me too.
It's a win-win-win.
Yeah. There's no way for us to lose.
That's right.
We rigged the game, kids.
Yeah. Friends.
Nobody chose let's just not watch a Criterion film this month.
That's true.
Right.
That would be a lose.
All right. I think we're done with that.
I think so. And I think we're done with the episode, right?
I think we are. We.
I believe so.
All right. Well,
Kent.
Thank you. I was wondering if you were going to do it this time.
and thank you guys so much for listening, especially this whole episode. And I think it's kind of a longer one than usual on the Criterion films, but there's a lot to talk about in this one, so thank you.
Yeah, had a blast.
Yeah, and then, of course, thank you, Jake Wagner-Russell, for doing intro and outro music. If you want to hear more of his music, you can do so at soundcloud.com/bopscotch.
Okay, guys, stay tuned to this channel. We just put out an episode on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and next week, instead of doing a Hobbs and Shaw, we are deciding to do a Quentin Tarantino filmography ranked. So it's kind of just going to be a Quentin Tarantino retrospective discussion episode, and it gives us a week to kind of place where we want Once Upon a Time in Hollywood to fall under the 9 films from Quentin Tarantino so far.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, so stay tuned to this feed. Subscribe for a friend. They'll thank you later.
That's right, and don't forget, you can vote on the poll that we just did for the Criterion film. You can also send us your thoughts or questions on the films that we're going to be reviewing each week at Casual Cinecast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thanks so much for listening, guys, and we will see you next time.
End of cinema.
End of podcasting.